weird.
Yeah, you must not get out much, kid, if your threshold for weird is fishing up an old bottle. And I say this as someone who is combing through a 30-year-old children's show in the 22nd episode of the all-new Mighty Morphin Zyurangers. Welcome back, everybody. Today we're looking at The Rockstar vs. Smash It, the Mirror of Death. Yes, I know you can see that, I just felt like saying it anyway. As far as adaptations go, The Rockstar is probably as close as this show is going to get. In both instances, the villain is after a magical mirror with untold destructive power that happens to fall into the hands of a little kid. Both mirrors are uncovered through the use of a treasure map found in an old bottle that is caught by said kid while fishing. The monster of the week retains his characteristic power, which is recreated in the American footage. The kid is the one who defeats his respective monster by using said mirror. In nearly every area of consequence, the Rockstar is simply the Mirror of Death filtered through an American lens. I don't think we've seen one of these in a while. In fact, they're so similar that they are also both 6th Ranger era episodes, not featuring the 6th Ranger. And after so many examples where Power Rangers shifted the episode to either before or after Tommy's tenure, I guess they decided leaving just this one was fine. This aired in the middle of Tommy's run. It features him in the credits. He does not appear in the episode. He's not even mentioned. Ironically, I freely admit that I look at this Power Rangers title and get it confused with A Star is Born, the one where Tommy auditions for that commercial. Now that I've seen the episode, I see where it comes from. The monster is a giant rock man who shoots rocks at people. He's a rock star. Get it? Yeah, I didn't get it. Just taking the title on its own, it doesn't exactly scream magic mirror found on the beach, does it? The Rockstar is that rare Power Rangers episode that focuses on Jason as a character rather than simply as the leader. He's looking after his young cousin Jeremy and is therefore unable to go on the field trip the other Rangers are taking in the Rad Bug. I have no idea where they're going. We just see them drive around a bit until Zordon brings them back into the plot. It's weird. Jeremy is excited to visit his cousin because he's interested in Jason's sole character trait, martial arts. At one point, Jason tells Jeremy that he used to suffer from low self-esteem until he started training. I think that's the most we ever learn about him. Hey, it's something. Truth be told, though, I think it's fair to say this is more about Jeremy than Jason. They eventually get separated due to Rita's attacks and Jason's need to keep his identity secret. Jeremy has the map to the mirror and has to evade putties by remembering Jason's earlier Bulk-inspired lesson of brains before brawn. That's a lot of focus to give a kid who doesn't even speak with his own voice.
I can't wait till I tell my cousin Jason.
It should be little surprise then that the Mirror of Death is even less focused on the Zyurangers. It's all about Tadashi, the kid who fishes up the treasure map. Most of these kids imprint on a Zyuranger, so they're friends forever, if forever means the end of the episode. Tadashi, however, is in it for the money, and assumes the Zyurangers, along with the monsters, are trying to jump his claim. He doesn't believe the heroes when they try to convince him it's not treasure he's going to find, but a weapon of mass destruction. He may be an annoying little punk, but he does have a reason. His dad died in an accident, leaving his mom to take care of him by herself as a theme park clerk, and he fantasizes about making money to take care of her. If there is any focus on the Zyurangers, it's the idea that Geki simply leaves his teammates to die when they're no longer of any use to him. They'll be hit by Dora Gonrock's rocks and be unable to move, so Geki just goes on without them. I find it understandable. The stakes are too high to let Lamy catch Tadashi first. But the way it's framed, with Don begging him to stay, it comes across as hilariously cruel. It gets even worse when it happens to Goshi and Boy, who were dropped in the resort's pool, with boulders attached to them. Yeah, just try not to drown, I guess. The funny thing is that in the Power Rangers version, Jason is the first to be hit with Rockstar's rocks, and his friends actually rescue him. They use a little-known tactic called pulling the rocks off. Geki's gotta feel so stupid for not thinking of that. I've alluded to it a couple of times now, but this episode of Zyuranger is visually distinctive compared to others. That's because it's technically a vacation episode, shot at the Namegawa Island Resort. There are plenty of glamour shots showing off the architecture and large collection of birds. One of its most distinctive fights is in front of, and eventually in, one of its pools. Assuming this Tower of Eternity was part of the park in real life, and not something created for the show, discovering the Mirror of Annihilation is directly tied into finagling puzzles built into the park itself, Indiana Jones style. It makes absolutely no sense how an ancient artifact would be hidden into a resort built in 1964, but thinking of this from a kid's perspective, this had to seem pretty cool. I know when I was a kid, I imagined the possibility of adventure around every corner, and this is the exact kind of scenario I would have dreamed up. Namegawa Island was probably both exotic enough and mundane enough to come across as magical yet accessible. It was almost certainly dreamed up as an attempt to draw attention to the resort, make it seem exciting to kids. Hey kids, visit Namegawa Island and you too can drown horribly in our pool. I'm not sure how well this publicity stunt worked given that Namegawa Island was shut down and abandoned in 2001. I managed to find a more recent picture of that iconic pool taken by an urban explorer, and it's not looking too good. In fact, this was 2009, so I can only imagine how much nature has reclaimed this by now, assuming it still hasn't been redeveloped. I'm sure there are a lot of filming locations that have changed in the past 30 years, but this does lend the episode a slightly greater feeling of melancholia. Obviously, Power Rangers is somewhat limited in what it can use. The Namegawa Island footage features plenty of Japanese people and, of course, the Japanese Zyurangers. Jason instead takes Jeremy to a random beach, which is a fairly decent match. When they have to jump into the fight footage, Zordon tells them to fight Scorpina at the beach club. Rather than a treasure chest accessed by the Tower of Eternity, Jeremy finds his mirror under a random spot of dirt on the ground. I love how the American mirror has clearly visible door hinges on it that its Japanese counterpart doesn't. Anyway, it all works, but the Power Rangers version is missing quite a bit of the pizzazz that makes the Zyuranger episode stand out. Imagine if this was an American show where the characters spend the entire time at Disney World, but its Japanese recut didn't bother shooting replacement footage in Disneyland Tokyo. They just went to a local park. They're only able to keep one scene where the characters happen to stumble into the Hall of Presidents, which they act like is just located at this Japanese park for some reason. And they call it something generic like Leader Pavilion to throw viewers off the trail. In the original, the magical item is found in Cinderella's castle. Here, it's just like under a tree and has door hinges. That's kind of what this feels like. The most interesting bits of this for our purpose is that while there are only a few things that are changed, what is changed seems weird and pointless and probably would have been better had they not been. Here's an example. Mirror of Death opens with Tadashi stumbling upon the treasure map that leads to the mirror. It's literally the first thing that happens. That's what inspires Bandora and the Zyurangers to go after it. In Power Rangers, Rita randomly decides she wants the Mirror of Destruction, and wouldn't you know, 5 minutes later, Jeremy happens to find the map to it, while he and Jason are doing something completely unrelated. What an amazing coincidence! In Zyuranger, Don is the first to fall to Doragon Rock's rock. Later on, he stumbles into the pool battle, but can't do much because of his rock. Power Rangers likewise has to figure out a way to deal with Billy. It seems like the solution would be obvious. Put a rock on him. They already demonstrated they have the props to do that. Zack and Trini are likewise going to be hit in this scene. For some reason, though, they don't. Which ultimately makes Billy the only character not to be hit by one. Instead, when Zordon sends them to the beach club, Billy decides on his own he's going to go look for Jeremy. Remember the last video where Zordon wouldn't allow a single Power Ranger to help the kidnapped Tommy because stopping Goldar and Scorpina from attacking the quarry was too important? It gets even weirder though, because they repurpose that image of the heroes posing in front of their medallions, but they zoom in on it to keep Billy from being visible. But this is right after they forgot to remove him from the morphine sequence. Oh, and we never see Billy look for Jeremy, so this goes nowhere. The absolute best part of this though is that unlike Billy, Don eventually does end up at the battle and he flails about, unable to get the rock off of him. He's in the background of a few shots and he's very, very visible in Power Rangers. Eagle-eyed kids had to be wondering who was this silly man who kept falling down. Let's score them. For story, they're more or less the same story, so I'm gonna go ahead and give it a tie. You might be surprised to hear me say that characters is a bit tougher. I like that we learn a little bit about Jason and spend some time with him. I haven't discussed the ending though. Lami/Scorpina gets the mirror and Bandora/Rita makes her grow. With the help of Grifazar/Goldar, who holds Dai Jujin/Megazord in place, Lami/Scorpina prepares to kill the heroes by forcing them to look in the mirror. However, the heroes step on Grifazar/Goldar's foot, putting him in direct line with the mirror. This is when the heroes get the chance to destroy the mirror. It's the resolution of the conflict, and I can't help but feel it carries more weight in Zyuranger. I'm sure Scorpina doesn't want to kill Goldar, but they don't have any kind of personal relationship. It's fine, but it's also generic. Lami's reaction is of someone who almost killed the love of her life. On top of that, Jeremy is about as random a kid as you can get. Tadashi's not great, but he is at least memorable. Zyuranger wins. Finally, for action, nearly all of it is the same. Jason and Jeremy get a decent putty fight. Power Rangers does something weird though. Futzing with the Tower of Eternity sends out a beam that blows open the cave that houses the mirror's treasure chest. Since the mirror in Power Rangers is just under some dirt, they repurpose this footage to show Jeremy accidentally using the mirror to blow up a mountain. So it shoots out a beam until it doesn't when it acts normally and requires you to look into it. It's not really worth complaining about, I just think it's weird. Anyway, I'm going to give it a tie, which means that Zyuranger barely edges this one out. They're both perfectly fine, perfectly standard episodes of their respective shows. This Zyuranger title is actually a lie. No dinosaur is born in this episode, but forget about that. A monster, the Samurai Fan Man, intrudes on Kimberly's already bad day and sucks her up into his gourd. And that is a moment I will never forget because, as far as I can remember, that's the first Power Rangers anything I ever saw. Yes, this was my first episode. I was in second grade, and I remember my mom telling me one day after school that she had been talking to my friend's mom, who told her he'd been watching this new show called Power Rangers. My mom told me to check it out, so I did. All I really remember is Kimberly walking into school a soaking mess, and her getting attacked, but whatever happened, I was hooked. At least for a couple of years. Because of that, this episode is very special to me. Upon rewatching it and its counterpart for this series though, I found another reason to consider this special. Even before I got to Zyuranger, it was obvious to me that the Samurai Fan Man was a monster heavily inspired by something else. He has a Nyoibo. He has a Bashosen. He uses a gourd to trap victims. His name in Zyuranger is Dora Ginkaku, a character from the book Bandora is reading at the beginning, which is Journey to the West. That just blows my mind. I mean, I'm not surprised that a Japanese show would be inspired by Journey to the West. It happens all the time. 2 iterations later, Ninja Sentai Kakuranger would base its entire premise around it. It's just that Journey to the West also inspired Dragon Ball, which I would get into almost exactly 5 years later, and which would become, well, all of this. I can't believe my first exposure to Power Rangers was, in a way, my first exposure to Dragon Ball. I guess that's neither here nor there for our purposes, but I was surprised to see Bandora curse Son Goku. Power Rangers tones down the Journey to the West references as much as they can.
My samurai lance will knock you into the next galaxy!
Nyoibo becoming the Samurai Lance. I'm okay with that one. Aside from that, Power Rangers also cuts out the dinosaur eggs. Yep, the dinosaur eggs are back, and at least they're not nearly as off topic as they were last time we saw them. A couple of kids find them, a bully takes them, Bandora sends out her storytime themed monster who ends up capturing May, the kids, and the eggs. In Power Rangers, Rita targets Kimberly because she's already having a very unlucky day. She breaks her lamp, falls out of bed, has bad hair, finds her dress has been ruined, shatters a mirror, and gets soaked in a storm. It's a very low stakes but relatable, nothing goes right today scenario. Getting Tommy out of the way is as simple as him walking Kimberly home.
Well, how about if I walk you home after school?
Well, you know, anything could happen.
Yeah, he knows. That's why he's offering. For some reason, while Samurai Fan Man attacks both of them, he only takes Kimberly. Look, I know that was the plan, but still, take advantage of the opportunity when you have it, especially given how weak Tommy apparently is to gourd magic. Kimberly gets the full blast and is captured, but otherwise fine. Tommy gets a whiff of the periphery and he remains unconscious for most of the episode. As usual, he only wakes up the moment the Power Rangers desperately need him.
The Power Rangers need me. I'm morphing now.
Oscar moment right here. Honestly, his exclusion from capture would have made far more sense had they kept the Journey to the West rules. King Kaku can only capture someone if they answer to their name. Goshi stops Boy from doing just that because, apparently, he's read the story. He's Goshi, he reads everything. So if Samurai Fan Man had accosted Kimberly according to those rules, he could have captured her, while Tommy being rendered unconscious would have actually saved him from answering. As long as we're on the subject, this is an episode where Barai shows up but doesn't transform, so other footage has to be used for Tommy to be included. Not a lot, his role is rather small. While Goshi keeps the Zyurangers from answering, Zack is warning his friends against damaging the gourd because it's another dimension that's going to disappear or something. Seeing his plan won't work, Dora Kinkaku breaks out his Basho-sen and blows them all away. Samurai Fan Man does this too, and we briefly see the Zyurangers, or their action figures, on the viewing globe. However, Alpha is able to redirect them back to the command center. The Zyurangers, however, don't get it so easy. They get another lecture from the Guardian Beasts, or their toys, which could have easily been cut in half. I mean, so much of it is them just explaining their various forms. I know, I've seen the show. How does this help them? Then they go into a spiel about life and how things die, but new life cycles through, and that makes people happy. Basically, they're just telling them to get the damn eggs, which, you know, they're already trying to do. The only tangible information they get is that the eggs will hatch in 60 days. That's the thing about gods, they just love hearing themselves talk. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to keep talking about this episode. This load of pseudo-philosophical waffle only comes back at the end when Barai realizes that he'll probably not be around to see the dinosaurs being born, but he's still happy at the prospect of new life. Okay, that's nice, but jeez is that introduced awkwardly. Eventually, the Zyurangers are just back in the world, and Geki finds where May and the others are by listening to the heartbeat of the baby dinosaurs. I'm sure that's more new age, live stream, we're all connected yada yada. Whatever. They show up on their motorcycles. And I will give Power Rangers credit for this. They absolutely cannot cut around the Golem waiters this time, so they finally embrace the humor. It's not given any explanation, but hearing Zordon say, "the Putty Bowl restaurant," makes my day. However, they can't cut around all the shots the motorcycles appear in, and they are close enough to the camera that an observant kid's going to wonder why these color-coded animal-themed motorcycles are there. What's also interesting here is that after they get their butts kicked the first time, Zordon tells him they can do it with their Zords. So much for that no escalation rule, right? Now Zordon doesn't care if they step on a bad guy. That makes this change all the stranger. The Zyurangers actually do summon their guardian beasts first, forcing Bandora to do the same to King Kaku and Grifazar. However, Power Rangers switches that around. Why even write that line if they're still going to change things? The Power Rangers have to shuffle through various incomplete transformations because they don't have Kimberly. The Zyurangers have to shuffle through various incomplete transformations because they don't have May? Since when is that a problem? Do you need to have the Zyurangers there to form Daijujin or not? Did the beasts use up all their independent agency monologuing earlier? After Kimberly is put in the gourd, she has nothing to do but stand around and yell. May, however, teaches the bully respect for the dinosaur lives he was trying to steal. They also trim out a bit of excessive violence. In Power Rangers, Squat shakes up the gourd just because he's a jerk. In Zyuranger, Bookbok does that because May shoots him in the eye with her bow and arrow. Dora Kinkaku also adds a ticking clock, throwing a lit stick into the gourd that threatens to burn all of them alive. Power Rangers instead goes with the less visceral urgency of the pocket dimension she's in disappearing. I'm guessing they didn't want the violence of setting Kimberly on fire. Still though, it makes her plight feel fairly static. The good news is, Princess May's 7 Metamorphoses is the next episode, which we covered last year, and where the roles are completely flipped. It's also just a much better episode in general. Scoring these is once again difficult because neither has a clear advantage over the other. They're both satisfactory. Story in particular depends on a lot of things. Do you care about the recurring dinosaur eggs plot? If so, Zyuranger might be appealing. For me it's appealing because of the more overt Journey to the West references, but those references still exist intact in Power Rangers. They're just never explicitly addressed. Zyuranger, I feel, kinda shoots itself in the foot with its near-pointless Guardian Beast babble, which Power Rangers thankfully doesn't have to deal with. It's a wash. For characters, it's the same game. Power Rangers has a bit more focus on Kimberly as a character, as well as Tommy's fondness of her, even if it's all front-loaded. On the opposite end, Zyuranger gets a little bit of pathos out of Burai, even if it's awkwardly introduced. As underwhelming as the line read is, and as superfluous as the concept ends up being, Tommy fighting through the pain to save his friends is stronger than Burai simply showing up to say, "Hey, I'm gonna help you now." I'll give it to Power Rangers. Finally, for action, very little has changed. Power Rangers is missing those little snippets I mentioned earlier. It also cuts out untransformed fights without adding any of their own, unless you count Tommy knocking Bulk into a mop bucket. There's nothing really cut that impacts the episode in a substantial way, but those small bits are enough to put Zyuranger over the top. And that makes it a tie. So that's it for this installment. As I said, we already covered Princess May's 7 Metamorphoses last year, which is amazing, and I highly recommend you check it out if you haven't. Because of that, next time we'll be looking at what I consider to be the saddest regular episode of Zyuranger, with the saddest monster. I honestly don't remember what the Power Rangers episode does with this, if it ramps up the melodrama or totally chickens out. I guess we'll find out. Thanks so much for watching. I greatly appreciate your support. The likes, the comments, the subscriptions. I always want to know how I'm doing and whether or not you're having a good time. And I have to feed the inscrutable algorithm however I can. I've heard it feeds on those things. I don't understand it. I just obey.